when it comes to the investigative process, the procedures that you would normally take, how do you acquire your research on it? How did you develop those protocols so they align with reality?
Well, that was tricky because I was very shy about it. I didn't, for example, if someone had told me, given your name as a contact, I wouldn't have called you. Now I might if you let me, but I wouldn't have called you because I would have been embarrassed to come to you and say, I'm a writer, because maybe I didn't feel like an authentic writer. So what I did is I did a lot of manual research trying to find out just general things like how was the police department organized, like in Tom's River? Who would investigate a homicide? But I never called a homicide detective and asked them for the procedures. And then I would read a lot of newspaper articles and see what I could pick up there. Wasn't the best way to do it. But for somebody who was afraid to step out and just ask, it worked okay. And I tried to keep my amateur sleuth away from the police investigation because, number one, the police would be able to solve it so much faster than her. And she would annoy them. And she annoyed them even as much as she did go into the investigation. But I didn't make it so I had to have heavy duty knowledge like I would have if I had been ever tried to write a police procedural, which I would not. But
interesting. Again,
so,
and that strikes to the research process. What made you name the protagonist of your first book, Meg Daniels?
I named her after my next door neighbor when I was growing up, whose name was Margaret. It wasn't Meg, but Meg was an updating of Margaret. And she was just somebody who had a big influence on my life. She and her husband were kind of yuppies long before there were yuppies. They didn't have children, so they would, take me and my friends places. And I just wanted to honor her for the role she had played. And then I was working on a temp job, or I call it a temp job. I was in a temporary office and I was sitting next to a man named John Daniel. And I just put an S on the end of the name and used his name because it seemed kind of generic. And I didn't have a strong ethnic component to my heroine. I felt like when I grew up, and my last name, obviously, it's Kelly, so I'm Irish, but I never had the strong feeling of any ethnicity. So I just wanted her to be kind of generic and have like a wider appeal. And that's how she ended up being named, and seemed to work for her. So I don't change it or make any attempt to.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's interesting, if I can just say one thing, that when I gave her a boyfriend, I gave him the name Andy Beck. And I picked Beck because I had worked when I first got out of college at Prudential Insurance. And I think the president's name was Beck or something like that. And I just thought it was a nice name. I didn't know him. I don't know anything about him. And then as time went on, I looked it up once, and it's a German name. And I realized that Andy probably would have some German traits, but I hadn't thought that far ahead. So really, he doesn't have any. The two of them are just sort of, out there. I might have to add something in if they ever get together with their families.
How do you go about your research in terms of what your next story is going to be?
I usually start, well, let me say there are two parts of my books divide into two parts. The first ones are set just current day. And so the research very much came down to what we talked about, finding out what police procedures would be, what the jurisdiction would be, and then location. So for those, I would just drive around, find locations in New Jersey. And interestingly, I got a text recently from a man who had tracked all the places I went in Missing You in Atlantic City, and found out that I had gone and they were all really there. He wanted to see if there was really an alley beside the restaurant. And he said, there really is an alley beside the restaurant. So that, for that type of research, a lot of that was just driving around looking. If I was going to have something bad happen, I would change the name. I would be a little ambiguous about the location. But generally it was easy, but I still got carried away. One time when the first book, Killing Time in Ocean City, she slides off a bar stool. And I actually drove from Philadelphia to the restaurant in Summers Point to see what kind of covers were on the bar stool, because I could see somebody saying to me, no, you can't slide off those. Now, since then, the restaurant changed hands like 5 times. It was eventually, I think, torn down. So I think I went overboard on that. I think that was a little extreme. While in the meantime, I was looking at bar stools, I had no idea that the Atlantic City Raceway was being torn down, and I had a scene there. So
the money is ready. If you'll please tell me where you want us to take it, we'll take it. Shortly? Shortly? You want us? That in order to establish for bond feeding, we will be forced to eliminate racism. Warriors of the
I sometimes, went a little too far on the details. But the part I love is in the later books, all of them are set against an event in social history. I mean, it may be like Missing You in Atlantic City. I should remember the titles of my book. It's set with the backdrop of the Democratic National Convention in 1964. But it's not about politics. It's just about the social structure at the time, and it just sets it in a time and place. But that's where I really love the research. I love doing that. I always start with newspapers, and I mourn the loss of newspapers because they had everything for you to learn about a time. Everything. Like, I even checked the characters' astrology, though I try not to give them a birth date if I can, because I don't want anyone to come and tell me he's not behaving like an Aries. But I just love newspapers as a source. And then after that, I would try to find experts in a certain field. I found a gentleman who was president of the Buick Club. I had a book, not a Plexus book. I've done a few books as an independent author, and a new car figured into it. And so I just gave it a color and a roof, and he told me, no, you could not pre-order that in that month, because in August they no longer produced from that factory, and they're not taking any mess. But you get the drift. It was so detailed, and you think, well, nobody will know, but he would if he read it. So it's great to get that kind of detail, and you can find amazing things on YouTube. I have one where there are bodies that may have been transported in a 1956 Thunderbird in the trunk. And I found a 2.5-minute commercial with Bing Crosby where he walks around the vehicle and gives you a complete tour of the vehicle. So, I mean, that's like a miracle to find that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I love is, I don't know, have you ever used Google Ngrams at all? Or
No.